The Whisperwind Expanse. Even the name, translated into galactic standard, carried a chill. It wasn't a place of dramatic gravitational anomalies or searing radiation, but something far more insidious. It was a vast, uncharted nebula that whispered into the very fabric of complex systems, both mechanical and cognitive. It frayed the edges of certainty, introduced phantom errors, and cultivated a creeping, pervasive sense of futility. Many had entered with grand designs. None had succeeded. Aboard the Zyloss Prime Designate Vigilance, a vessel whose kilometers-long crystalline spires dwarfed moonlets, prognosticator Krell surveyed the swirling miasma of the expanse through a panoramic viewscreen. His own normally vibrant amethystine skin was a dull, lusterless gray, a subtle reflection of the Zyloss crew's collective mood. For 3 standard centuries, the Zyloss, a species renowned for their intellect, their flawless logic, and their mastery of predictive science, had endeavored to stabilize a passage through the Whisperwind Expanse to reach a theorized source of unique, hyper-dense energy. Probability of success for continued operation. Krell's voice was a low, resonant thrum, devoid of inflection. Beside him, sub-prognosticator Lyra's mandibles twitched, a Zyloss sign of discomfort. Recalculated for the 900th cycle prognosticator, probability of achieving phase, gamma stabilization within acceptable resource parameters, 0.001%. Margin of error, negligible. Krell's multifaceted eyes, which usually shimmered with internal light, remained dim, and the probability of catastrophic system cascade if we persist beyond the optimal withdrawal window, ascending to 73.4% prognosticator. A sigh, like the shifting of fine sand, passed through Krell. So, the models concur with the inevitable. After 300 years, futility. He had overseen this project for the last 50 of those years, a position of immense honor that now felt like a leaden weight. The Zyloss did not fail. They calculated, they executed, they succeeded, or they logically determined the point of non-viability and ceased operations. This was the latter, on a scale that would send ripples of disappointment throughout the Zyloss ascendancy. Prepare the withdrawal protocols, Krell commanded. Inform the ascendancy. The Whisperwind Expanse remains uncooperative. As Lyra moved to enact the orders, a minor alert pinged on Krell's command console. He activated it with a flick of a slender digit, a tiny, almost insignificant blip on the edge of their sensor range. Identify. Unknown vessel prognosticator, an analyst reported. Primitive drive signature. Small, likely independent exploratory class. Trajectory. Entering the expanse. Krell allowed himself a flicker of something akin to Zyloss pity. Another hopeful, destined for disappointment. Log it and ignore. They are beneath our concern and outside our responsibility. He turned back to the view screen, watching the tendrils of the expanse writhe. Let them learn their own lesson in this graveyard of ambition. Miles away, aboard the human exploration vessel Striver, Dr. Aris Thorne leaned closer to his own sensor display, his brow furrowed in concentration. The ship was a compact, rugged vessel, scarred from a dozen previous expeditions into the galactic unknown. Fascinating energy readings, Captain. The background radiation isn't ionizing, but it's patterned, almost like interference, but on a quantum level. Captain Eva Rostova, a woman whose stern gaze missed nothing, stood with her arms crossed, her boots planted firmly on the command deck. Is it dangerous, Aris? Potentially. The historical data on the Expanse is sketchy, mostly third-hand accounts of ships just giving up. Equipment failures, crew despair, but no overt aggression. Aris felt a familiar thrill, a mix of caution and intense curiosity. This was precisely the kind of puzzle that drew him to the stars. His last major expedition had ended in a quiet failure, a premature abandonment of a promising line of inquiry, based on what his peers deemed insurmountable odds. The memory still stung. He wouldn't make that mistake again. All right, Rostova said, her voice crisp. Standard exploratory protocols. Shields at 30%. Jax, how are the engines looking? From the engineering pit, Jax Riley's voice crackled. over the comms laced with his usual wry cynicism. "Purring like a Catharian sand kitten, Captain, which means they'll probably try to claw my face off when I least expect it. But for now we're green." Rostova nodded. "Take us in slowly, Helm. Let's see what these whispers are all about." The Striver, a mere speck against the grandeur of the Zyloss ship and the daunting Expanse, pointed its nose into the unknown, utterly oblivious to the silent pronouncement of futility issued by a far superior power. The entry into the Whisperwind Expanse was deceptively calm. The swirling iridescent gases enveloped the Striver like a silent, ethereal fog. For the first few hours, all systems reported nominal, and the crew went about their duties with focused professionalism. Then the whispers began. Not audible sounds, but subtle, pervasive intrusions. A diagnostic on the primary sensor array would inexplicably reset mid-cycle. A carefully calibrated atmospheric sample would show fluctuating, impossible readings, before stabilizing. On the bridge, Ensign Halloway swore he'd input the correct coordinates for a short-range scan, only to find the system targeting a completely empty sector. These weren't critical failures, not yet, but they were persistent, like electronic mosquitoes. More insidiously, the psychological effects began to manifest. A quiet lethargy settled over the mess hall. Conversations became clipped, focus harder to maintain. Petty annoyances flared into brief, uncharacteristic spats. Aris Thorne, observing it all with a growing unease, felt a familiar tightness in his chest. It was the subtle onset of despair, a feeling he'd battled before. He found himself double-checking his own notes, a cold dread that he might be missing something obvious, that this entire endeavor was pointless. Damn it. Jax's voice, usually a grumble, was sharp with frustration from engineering. The primary coolant regulator is throwing ghost errors again. Reads critical, then fine, then critical. I've run diagnostics 6 times. Everything's mechanically sound. Captain Rostova's voice was a steady anchor. "Can you compensate?" "Jax?" "Compensating is my middle name, Captain," Jax growled back. "But this place is like a gremlin's playground. It's not breaking things, it's annoying them to death." Aris, listening intently, made a note. "Captain," he said, approaching the command chair. "The Zyloss records, sparse as they are, mention cognitive erosion and systemic uncertainty. I believe the Expanse doesn't just affect technology. It actively disrupts processes that rely on predictable linear progression, decision-making, diagnostic sequences, perhaps even focused intent." Rostova considered this. "So it makes you doubt yourself, and your machines doubt themselves?" "A manner of speaking, yes." Aris recalled human history, tales of sailors on long voyages succumbing to the doldrums, of explorers battling not just the elements, but the crushing weight of isolation and hopelessness. Humans had a long, intimate relationship with such feelings. Perhaps, he mused, too intimate for their own good, or perhaps it was a strange kind of strength. It was then that the Zyloss deigned to acknowledge them. A tight beam transmission, crisp and devoid of courtesy, sliced through the Striver's comms. Prognosticator Krell's image materialized on the main view screen. Tall, slender, his crystalline skin now a muted lavender. His multifaceted eyes seemed to look through them rather than at them. "Unidentified vessel," Krell's translated voice intoned, flat and dismissive. "You have entered a restricted Zyloss survey region. This expanse is demonstrably inimical to complex operations. Our own efforts, backed by technology and understanding vastly superior to your own, have proven inconclusive. We are withdrawing. For your own safety, and to prevent the needless expenditure of potential rescue resources, you are strongly advised to depart immediately." Rostova's eyes narrowed. "This is the Striver, an independent human exploration vessel. We appreciate your concern, prognosticator, but we are on a chartered scientific mission and will proceed with caution." Krell's facial structure, if it could be said to express anything, might have registered a flicker of Zyloss equivalent to mild surprise, quickly suppressed. "Your caution will be insufficient. The statistical probability of your vessel suffering mission-ending failure within the next operational cycle is 79.2%. Persisting is illogical. Aris felt a spark of defiance. With all due respect, prognosticator, humanity has a long history of succeeding at the illogical. Krell's gaze lingered on Aris for a moment, unreadable. Indeed. Your species' penchant for irrational deviations from optimal behavior is noted in our preliminary cultural assessments. The transmission ended as abruptly as it began. Well, Jax's voice came over the comms, dry as dust. Charming fellow. Guess we're the irrational ants at their doomed picnic. Rostova allowed herself a grim smile. Let them withdraw. We have our own mission. Aris, your theory about this expanse targeting certainty. Elaborate. If this place punishes rigid expectation, maybe a little human chaos is just what it needs. Suddenly a klaxon blared. Shield generator flux, shouted the tactical officer. It's cycling erratically, losing integrity on the starboard. Bow. Jax was already yelling. Diverting power. That damned regulator chose now to actually fail. Aris, if you've got any bright ideas about how this rust bucket likes its certainty, now's the time. Aris gripped the console, his mind racing. Certainty. Predictability. What was the opposite? Adaptation? Acceptance of flux? He looked at Rostova, whose face was set in a determined frown, already issuing orders, adapting. He looked at the image of Jax on his monitor, surrounded by sparking conduits already working the problem with a furious, desperate energy. This wasn't logical cessation of effort. This was the human response to a punch in the face. Plant your feet and punch back. The striver bucked as Jax rerouted power, a bone-jarring shudder that sent loose items skittering across the deck. Alarms shrieked, then were gradually silenced as the engineer, with a string of curses that were impressively multilingual, wrestled the shield generator back from the brink. The starboard shield emitter was fried, but he'd managed to extend the port emitter's field to compensate, leaving them lopsided but protected. Shield stable, Captain, Jax reported, his voice hoarse. But we're running on spit prayers and my last nerve. That was too close. Good work, Jax, Rostova acknowledged, her knuckles white where she gripped her armrests. Damage report. The next few hours were a testament to human improvisation. Minor systems continued to glitch, navigation remained a headache, and the ever-present psychic humidity of the expanse weighed on everyone. But the striver pressed on. They weren't trying to stabilize a path through the nebula or achieve some grand, centuries-spanning objective. Their goals were smaller, more immediate. Collect data on the strange radiation, analyze the unique particulate matter, chart a small, previously unexplored sector of the expanse. On the Zyloss command ship Vigilance, now slowly maneuvering to begin its multi-stage withdrawal, prognosticator Krell found his attention drawn against his better judgment to the tiny human vessel. Their continued presence was a statistical anomaly. By all Zyloss predictive models, factoring in their primitive technology and the expanse's known effects, the striver should have either retreated in disarray or fallen silent. Instead, his long-range sensors painted a curious picture. The human ship was moving erratically, yes, but also purposefully. It would stop, perform scans, move a short distance, encounter some minor difficulty, then adjust, and try again. There was no discernible high-level strategy, merely a dogged, iterative process. Sub-prognosticator Lyra, Krell intoned, his gaze fixed on a telemetry feed from the striver. The human vessel. Report their status. Lyra consulted her console, a faint shimmer of violet, Zyloss surprise, coloring her crystalline skin. Prognosticator, they are. Still operational. Multiple minor system failures reported and apparently circumvented. They are proceeding with what appears to be localized data collection. Their energy output is unstable, their progress minimal. Krell felt a flicker of something that might have been Zyloss irritation. Minimal progress is still progress. Our models predicted cessation of function, not this stubborn pottering. Aris Thorne, meanwhile, was finding patterns in the expanse's interference. It's not random, Captain, he explained during a brief lull, pointing to a complex wave diagram. The disruptive field, it pulses, and it seems to react to focused, high-energy system use. like it's pushing back against concerted effort. But lower-level, more dispersed activities seem to slip under its radar, so to speak. Rostova nodded. So brute force is out. Subtlety and patience are in. She considered their next survey point, a dense gas cloud that sensors hinted might contain complex organic molecules. Getting there directly will involve a sustained burn through a high-interference zone. Risky. Aris, remembering stories his grandmother used to tell about ancient Earth mariners navigating by intuition and subtle signs, had an idea. Perhaps not a direct route. What if we skirt the edge, take intermittent readings, and let the Expanse's currents guide us a bit? More like tacking a sailboat than piloting a starship. Rostova looked at him, then at the navigational display, showing the Zyloss predictions of escalating failure for any direct approach. It was unorthodox. It was inefficient. It might just work. Make it so, Doctor. Let's see if we can't coax this Expanse into cooperating. The striver altered, course beginning a meandering, almost hesitant path towards the gas cloud. It took 3 times longer than a direct route would have, and involved several course corrections based on Aris's evolving feel for the Expanse's rhythms. To Krell, watching from afar, it looked like a vessel utterly lost. Then, a focused burst of data from the striver reached his sensors, complex organic spectra. Insignificant by Zyloss standards of discovery perhaps, but proof the humans had reached their target. Krell's internal logic circuits felt a distinct strain. "They are celebrating, prognosticator," Lyra reported, her voice tinged with disbelief. The Zyloss sensors, capable of discerning minute details even at extreme range, were picking up increased biosigns from the human ship, fluctuations in their internal atmospheric composition consistent with. Krell accessed the Zyloss cultural database for primitive species social rituals. Shared consumption of stimulating beverages, increased vocalizations, and what their xenologists termed positive emotional resonance. They are celebrating a statistically negligible achievement procured through grossly inefficient means, Krell observed, yet his gaze remained fixed on the human ship. He ordered a continuous, dedicated sensor lock on the striver. This irrational, persistent anomaly required further study before the Zyloss departed the Expanse for good. Their stubborn, illogical effort, their refusal to accept the inevitable, was something Zyloss psychology had no framework for. It was unexpectedly intriguing. The decision by prognosticator Krell to maintain observation on the striver was a footnote in the Zyloss withdrawal logs, a minor allocation of sensor resources while the grand machinery of their departure was set in motion. The Zyloss Empire was built on predictable successes and the logical cessation of endeavors deemed futile. The Whisperwind Expanse project was now firmly in the latter category. Their withdrawal was a complex, multi-stage process, meticulously planned to minimize risk and resource expenditure. It was during the initiation of Phase Beta of the withdrawal, the carefully orchestrated disengagement of the primary anchoring tethers that had held their massive station stable against the Expanse's subtle currents for decades, that the unpredictable occurred. A pulse, far stronger and more coherent than any previously recorded, radiated from the depths of the Expanse. It wasn't an energy blast in the conventional sense, but a wave of pure cognitive and systemic disruption. On the vigilance, alarms, silent for so long, blared with sudden, unmitigated fury. The carefully calibrated disengagement sequence for the anchor tethers went haywire. Instead of releasing, magnetic clamps fused solid. Containment fields around the localized singularities powering the withdrawal engines flickered, threatening to collapse. Prognosticator, subprognosticator. Lyra's voice was tight with panic, her crystalline skin flashing chaotic, uncontrolled colors, a raw display of Zyloss distress rarely witnessed. Multiple critical system failures. The tethers are locked, and the primary stabilizers are offline. We are adrift and integrity fields are failing across decks 7 through 12. Krell gripped his command console, his own skin paling to a stark, chalky white. His mind, usually a beacon of calm calculation, reeled. This was not in any model, not in any prediction. For 3 centuries, the Expanse had been a passive, demoralizing fog. Now it had pushed back. Damage control. Krell's voice was sharper than he intended. Recalibrate withdrawal sequence. Find a bypass for the tether locks. But the Zyloss crews, paragons of efficiency in predictable environments, were struggling. Their procedures were designed for known failures, for contingencies within established parameters. This was chaos. Despair, a sentiment they usually observed in lesser species, began to infect their ranks. The carefully constructed facade of Zyloss imperturbability was cracking. Simultaneously, light years away in relative terms but still deep within the expanse, the striver was slammed by the same disruptive wave. The ship felt like it had been kicked by a giant. Lights died, then sputtered back on under emergency power. Jax's voice was a torrent of curses and technical jargon. All main systems offline. Drive core containment is fluctuating wildly. We've got microfractures along the port nacelle, and life support is on backup. Captain Rostova was thrown from her chair, catching herself on a support stanchion. Aris? What was that? Aris, his own station dark, was trying to get a reading from a handheld emergency sensor. A focused wave. Much stronger, it felt intentional. Not just interference, but a targeted disruption. It's like the expanse woke up. He felt a cold dread. They were a gnat in a hurricane. On the bridge of the striver, the lights flickered, casting long, dancing shadows. The low thrum of the engines was replaced by an ominous silence, punctuated by the hiss of strained conduits and the distant groan of tortured metal. They were tumbling, uncontrolled, deeper into the malevolent heart of the Whisperwind Expanse. Jax, talk to me. Can we get propulsion back? Rostova's voice was strained but steady. Working on it, Captain. But the primary conduits are fried. The control system for the magnetic constrictors is, well, it's less a system and more a suggestion, right? Now, if I try to force a restart, we could blow the core. Aris, looking at the faint, erratic readings on his emergency scanner, saw a pattern emerging from the chaos, a faint echo in the storm. The wave. It had a focal point, a direction. It wasn't uniform. He fought against the rising tide of despair. The Expanse's signature oppression now amplified 100-fold. Think, Aris. Think. Your past failure was giving up when data was sparse. Don't do it again. Krell on the Vigilance watched his flawless Zyloss machine begin to unravel. His subordinates, trained to execute precise instructions, were freezing, their logical processes overwhelmed by the sheer number of cascading, unpredicted failures. Zyloss culture had no rights for shared crisis, no ingrained mechanisms for collective improvisation in the face of utter system collapse. They were efficient individuals, but their interconnectedness was brittle. The Zyloss, who had been on the verge of logically abandoning their grand project, were now facing a fight for their very survival, a fight for which they were psychologically and culturally unprepared. The human ship, already struggling, was now in even direr straits. The Whisperwind Expanse had just raised the stakes for everyone, and the odds of survival, for both the mighty Zyloss and the insignificant humans, had plummeted towards zero. The striver was a wounded animal, tumbling through the dark. Emergency lights cast an eerie red glow over the bridge where Captain Rostova clung to a handhold, her face a mask of grim determination. The psychic pressure of the Expanse was a physical weight urging surrender, whispering of the futility of struggle. Jax, status, Rostova barked, her voice cutting through the oppressive silence. Bad, Captain, real bad. Jax's voice was tight with strain, punctuated by the screech of protesting metal from engineering. Main power is a lost cause for now. I'm trying to get the maneuvering thrusters online with the emergency cells, but the control linkages are shot. It's like trying to knit with cooked spaghetti. Aris Thorne, strapped into his acceleration couch, forced himself to focus past the tendrils of despair coiling in his gut. He looked at the faint, flickering readings on his jury-rigged sensor array. The disruptive wave had a resonance, an ebb and flow. It wasn't constant. The interference, he muttered, then louder. Captain, the disruptive field isn't uniform. It pulses, and there are quieter pockets, almost like eddies in a current. He remembered his earlier theory about the expanse reacting to emotional states, to certainty. The Zyloss, with their panic, their shattered certainty, might be amplifying the effect around them. But what about the striver? Rostova seized on it. Can you predict them, Aris? Give Jax a window? Predict? No, not with this equipment. But I can feel them out. It's intuitive. Aris closed his eyes, focusing on the subtle shifts in the background radiation, the almost imperceptible easing and tightening of the expanse's oppressive grip. It was like listening for a change in the wind before a storm. Jax, Rostova ordered. Stand by. Aris will call it. When he says now, you give those thrusters everything they've got for a controlled burst. We need to stop this tumble. It was a long shot, relying on a xenolinguist's intuition and an engineer's prayer. Minutes stretched into an eternity of groaning metal and rising fear. Then Aris's eyes snapped open. Now, Jax. Brief window, starboard vector. Firing! Jax slammed his palm onto a bypass switch. The striver shuddered violently as the maneuvering thrusters spat out a short, desperate burst of energy. Metal screamed, but they held. The sickening. Tumble slowed, then miraculously stabilized. They were no longer spinning, though they were still adrift. Got it, Captain, Jax yelled, a note of triumph in his voice. We're stable for now, but we're running on fumes. It was in that moment of precarious safety that their long-range sensors, battered but partially functional, picked up a massive chaotic energy signature miles away. Multiple distress signals, Zyloss in origin, cut through the static. The Zyloss, Rostova breathed. They're in worse shape than we are. She looked at Aris, then at the tactical display showing their own dwindling power reserves and compromised hull. The Zyloss had been condescending, dismissive. They owed them nothing. Helping them would be an insane risk. Aris met her gaze. His face was pale, streaked with grime, but his eyes held a new clarity. The ghost of his past failure, of giving up too soon, had been exercised in that moment of desperate improvisation. Captain, he said, his voice quiet but firm. That disruptive wave, the Zyloss ship with its massive power core and I suspect its crew's collective state of logical breakdown, might be acting as an amplifier for the expanse's effect. Their crisis could be making things worse for this entire sector, including us. He paused. And they're sentient beings in distress. We have data from our passage, those eddies I felt. It's not much, but it might give them a fraction of a chance to find a calmer pocket to regroup. Rostova wrestled with the decision. Her first duty was to her ship, her crew. But Aris was right, and the thought of leaving anyone to die in this hellish place, even arrogant Zyloss, sat ill with her. Can we even transmit with this much interference? A tight beam burst, Aris suggested. Short, encoded. If we time it with one of the lulls. Do it, Rostova commanded. Send them what we know about navigating the distortions, and may whatever gods exist have mercy on all our stubborn souls. On the bridge of the Vigilance, Prognosticator Krell watched his command disintegrate. Zyloss, normally so composed, were succumbing to a paralyzing despair. Their logic had failed them, their predictions shattered. He himself felt the cold tendrils of futility tightening around his own mind. They were doomed. Then, a signal. Faint, heavily encoded, almost lost in the raging storm of interference. Human, a junior analyst, her skin the color of ash, managed to decode it. Prognosticator. It's from the human vessel, the striver. It's data, navigational adjustments, observations on localized field distortions within the expanse. They claim it might offer temporary reprieve. Krell stared at the incoming data stream, a tiny trickle of order in a sea of chaos. The humans, the primitives, offering assistance? To them? It was illogical. It was astounding. Zyloss culture dictated that in a crisis of this magnitude, a lesser species would prioritize its own survival above all else or simply collapse. This act of inexplicable altruism was a variable his lifetime of learning had never prepared him for. Pride warred with desperation. To accept help from such a source was unthinkable. To refuse it in their current state was a death sentence. The bridge of the Zyloss command ship Vigilance was a tableau of ordered panic slowly giving way to frozen despair. Prognosticator Krell watched the data from the human vessel's driver spool across a secondary console. It was rudimentary, almost insultingly simplistic compared to the Zyloss's own sophisticated sensor telemetry, yet it contained observations, correlations regarding the Expanse's disruptive pulses, that their own rigid analytical models had entirely overlooked. The humans, it seemed, had been feeling their way through the storm, rather than trying to calculate it into submission. Prognosticator? Sub-prognosticator Lyra said, her voice trembling slightly, a shocking display for a Zyloss. The data. It suggests exploiting momentary asynchronous nodes in the disruption field. Our models show such nodes as statistically insignificant, too transient to be tactically viable. And yet, Krell murmured, his multifaceted eyes fixed on the human data. The humans are still transmitting. They survived the pulse that crippled us. Their insignificant observations may hold significance we have failed to grasp. Pride was a luxury the Zyloss could no longer afford. Their vessel was tearing itself apart. Integrate the human data. Recalibrate stabilization efforts based on their trajectory through these asynchronous nodes. The order sent a ripple of disbelief through the remaining conscious Zyloss on the bridge. Rely on primitive data? It was anathema. But Krell's authority, born of centuries of Zyloss hierarchy, held. Hesitantly, then with growing urgency as systems continued to degrade, Zyloss technicians began to apply the human insights to their vastly more powerful, but currently flailing technology. Slowly, miraculously, the tide began to turn. By focusing their remaining power on systems within the brief shifting pockets of relative calm described by the human data, they managed to halt the catastrophic decay of several critical systems. The violent shuddering of the Vigilance lessened. Containment fields stabilized. It wasn't a rescue, not yet, but it was a reprieve, a sliver of hope in the crushing darkness. Krell ordered a secure communication channel opened to the striver. It took time, the Expanse still fighting them, but eventually Aris Thorne's tired, grimy face appeared on Krell's viewscreen. Human Aris Thorne, Krell began, the formal Zyloss greeting sounding almost alien in this context. Prognosticator, Krell of the Zyloss Ascendancy acknowledges your transmission. Your unconventional data has proven unexpectedly useful. You have our gratitude. It was a stark admission, one that cost Krell dearly in Zyloss pride, but truth was paramount. Aris managed a weary smile. Glad we could help, Prognosticator. We're all in this Expanse together, it seems. Indeed. Krell paused, studying the human. Our models, our centuries of research, did not prepare us for this outcome, nor for the methodologies your species employs. Your persistence in the face of statistically certain failure. Your altruism, when self-preservation would be the logical imperative. It is anomalous. Aris leaned forward. Prognosticator, if I may, human history is filled with anomalies. We've faced extinction-level events on our homeworld, fought wars that rationality dictated were unwinnable, chased dreams that logic deemed impossible. Persistence isn't always logical for us. Sometimes it's just what we do. We try, one more time even when the data says we shouldn't. Krell absorbed this. The Zyloss prized efficiency, the elegant cessation of effort when futility was proven. Humans, it seemed, often defined futility differently or ignored it altogether. Their inefficiencies, their emotional spectrum, their sometimes chaotic social structures, their stubborn refusal to give up. Perhaps these weren't flaws as Zyloss xenologists had initially catalogued them. Perhaps they were components of a different, more resilient kind of complex system. Why? Krell asked, the question raw, stripped of Zyloss formality. It was the question that had been burning in his mind since the striver first ignored his warning. Why persist when all indicators point to cessation as the logical, the optimal course? Aris was silent for a long moment, the emergency lights of the striver casting his face in shadow and red light. "Because, prognosticator," he said finally, his voice quiet but resonant. "Sometimes the indicators are wrong. Sometimes the map isn't the territory. Sometimes what's on the other side of one more try is everything. And sometimes there's just nothing left to do but try. Because giving up is a kind of death, too. We're not built for that kind of ending, if there's a breath left to fight with." Krell felt a profound shift within his consciousness, like tectonic plates rearranging. The human's words didn't offer a new equation or a predictable model. They offered a glimpse into a different way of existing in the universe, a way that embraced uncertainty, that drew strength from the very act of striving against the impossible. The Zyloss were not saved yet. But for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Prognosticator Krell did not feel the cold grip of despair. He felt curiosity and a dawning, unsettling respect for the small, stubborn species called human. The collaboration, if it could be called that, was unlike anything in Zyloss or human history. The striver, battered but tenacious, relayed its intuitive, hard-won observations about the Expanse's shifting patterns. The Zyloss on the Vigilance, with their vastly superior processing power, integrated this illogical data, realigning their efforts to work with the Expanse's moods rather than against them. It was a slow, arduous process. Setbacks were frequent. The Whisperwind Expanse did not yield its secrets easily, but the humans, led by Aris Thorne's insights and Captain Rostova's unwavering command, didn't give up. Jax Riley, deep in the guts of the striver, performed miracles of engineering improvisation, coaxing life from dying systems with little more than wire, ingenuity, and sheer bloody-mindedness. Each small success, each shared piece of data that helped the Zyloss stabilize another section of their wounded behemoth, was a victory hard-earned. Prognosticator Krell, observing this, found his entire worldview reconfiguring. He saw the humans take breaks even in the midst of crisis to share food, to offer words of encouragement, to simply rest, activities Zyloss efficiency protocols would have deemed wasteful. Yet they returned to their tasks with renewed vigor. He saw them deviate from established procedures, trying unorthodox solutions that, by Zyloss standards, bordered on recklessness, yet sometimes yielded surprising breakthroughs. He realized their own Zyloss models of the Expanse had failed not because their calculations were flawed, but because their fundamental assumptions were. They had tried to impose order on a system that thrived on a different kind of dynamic. The humans, with their inherent adaptability honed by a chaotic evolutionary past, didn't just endure the chaos. They danced with it. Slowly, painstakingly, the Vigilance was brought back from the brink. Its critical systems were restored, its vast structure stabilized. The immediate danger had passed. The Zyloss could now complete their withdrawal, not in triumph as they had once envisioned, but with a chastened understanding. More than that, Krell saw a new path for the Zyloss's original grand project. The Expanse wasn't an insurmountable barrier if approached differently. The unique energy source they sought might still be attainable, not through overwhelming force or rigid planning, but through a more adaptive, patient, and perhaps even intuitive strategy, a strategy inspired by human persistence. As the striver prepared to disengage and continue its own interrupted mission, a formal communication request came from the Vigilance. Prognosticator Krell appeared on their main screen, his crystalline skin now a calm, reflective silver. The bridge of the Zyloss ship behind him was still scarred, but the panic was gone, replaced by a weary but focused resolve. "Captain Rostova, Dr. Thorne, Engineer Riley, crew of the striver," Krell began, his voice carrying a new resonance. "The Zyloss ascendancy offers its profound gratitude. You acted with courage and selflessness when logic, by our understanding, would have dictated otherwise. You have demonstrated a unique form of strength, one previously uncatalogued by our xenometricians." Rostova nodded, a rare, small smile, touching her lips. "We're just glad everyone's safe, Prognosticator. It's been an interesting detour." Aris felt a quiet sense of vindication. Not a triumphant boast, but the deep satisfaction of seeing a difficult task through, of validating that spark of illogical hope. He had faced his own past failure in the crucible of the Expanse and emerged stronger. Krell continued, "Our records of the Whisperwind Expanse will be amended. The models will be revised. But more significantly, the Zyloss archives will now include a dedicated study of human persistence as a significant galactic behavioral phenomenon. Your species' capacity to endure, to adapt, and to maintain effort in the face of overwhelming improbability. It is a variable that will reshape many of our galactic interaction protocols." Jax, listening from engineering, let out a low whistle. "Hear that, Captain? We're officially a significant galactic behavioral phenomenon. Ma always said I was special." Rostova shot a warning glance towards the comm pickup, but her eyes twinkled. "The Zyloss will not forget what transpired here," Krell stated. It was not a promise of alliance nor a threat, but a simple statement of fact. A seed of profound respect had been planted in the sterile, logical soil of the Zyloss psyche. "We may yet find a way to navigate this expanse thanks to the lesson you have inadvertently taught us. Safe journey, Striver." The connection closed. The Striver, running on patched systems and the sheer willpower of its crew, slowly maneuvered away from the colossal Zyloss vessel. Behind them, the Vigilance, instead of immediately warping out, remained, its sensors once again turned towards the swirling depths of the Whisperwind Expanse, no longer with despair, but with a new, cautious, and strangely human-like contemplation. "Well, Aris," Captain Rostova said, as the Striver finally cleared the worst of the Expanse's influence and the stars ahead began to look blessedly ordinary. "Looks like you got your unsolvable puzzle a little more solved than you bargained for." Aris Thorne looked out. At the star-dusted void, a universe that suddenly felt a little wider, a little more open to the tenacious spirit of beings who simply refused to give up. "Perhaps, Captain," he said softly. "Perhaps. But I suspect the galaxy has a few more anomalies waiting for us." The Striver engaged its battered FTL drive, leaving behind the Whisperwind Expanse, a place of shattered certainties and newly forged respect. Its journey a quiet testament to the enduring, often illogical, and utterly formidable persistence of humanity. The echoes of their endurance would ripple further than they knew.